Ho-Oh, one of the most iconic and beloved legendary Pokemon of all time. While nowadays it is somewhat overshadowed by its counterpart, Lugia, this bright, beautiful bird is still cherished by many fans. From its mysterious debut in the first episode of the anime, to being the cover legendary for what may be the greatest Pokemon game ever made, Ho-Oh has always been a prominent Pokemon in the franchise. As such, Ho-Oh has been treated to a large variety of cards in the Pokemon TCG, and that's just what we'll be taking a look at today. So join me as we take a look at the legacy of Ho-Oh in the Pokemon TCG. Unfortunately, Ho-Oh's presence in the TCG has a very rocky start. Debuting in Neo Revelation, Ho-Oh's first card isn't the worst out there. It can accelerate its own energy with its Stoke attack, snipe 40 damage with its Sacred Fire, and deal a solid 90 damage with its Dive Bomb attack, which in this era of the game is actually quite a lot, with even some Stage 2 Pokemon having 90 or even less HP. In a vacuum, this card seems pretty strong. However, the problems start to show themselves when you compare it to other similar cards from the time, most notably Moltres from Fossil, who has the same Dive Bomb attack. Though it deals 10 less damage, it also costs 1 less energy, which in a format defined by energy removal and super energy removal is actually a pretty good trade-off. It's also relevant to mention that Ho-Oh, unlike Moltres, is weak to water, which makes it an overall weaker option against certain decks such as Blastoise or Feraligatr. Releasing alongside this Ho-Oh was another colorless type Ho-Oh, whose Rainbow Burn attack would deal more damage for each different type of energy that was attached to it. While this was and still is a very unique attack for the game, the damage just wasn't worth the hassle of trying to power it up, as there weren't any ways to accelerate different energies onto Pokemon at the time, meaning you had to manually attach each of the different energy cards in order to power it up, which would, again, prove to be very difficult. The next Ho-Oh card would arrive in Skyridge, with this card being one of the very few to be a part of the short-lived Crystal Pokemon mechanic. Crystal Pokemon were the primary chase cards for the E-card sets, which were all colorless Pokemon that could change their typings with their Crystal-type Pokebodies. While all of these cards shared the same ability in name, the types that they could change into varied per card, with Ho-Oh having the ability to change into either a Fire, Water, or Lightning type, depending on which energy was attached from your hand. Unfortunately, as is the case with pretty much every single one of the Crystal cards, these cards are far more interesting than they are actually playable, with both of its attacks doing way too little damage for the weird energy costs that are required. But honestly, with a card this old and valuable, the last thing you'd actually want to do is put it in a deck and shuffle it up, so maybe it being bad is really just a blessing in disguise. The next couple of sets were also not very kind to Ho-Oh, with all of these guys being not only bad, but just boring, with most of these cards having some attack with mediocre damage that costs way too much energy for what you get, especially considering that most of these attacks only function on a coin flip. But with the arrival of EX Unseen Forces, Ho-Oh EX would emerge. Its Golden Wing Pokepower would allow you to move 2 energy attached to Ho-Oh to your other Pokemon however you'd like when it was knocked out, helping to conserve your energy in play and potentially sacrifice one Ho-Oh to power up another to make use of its Rainbow Burn attack. This attack is nearly the exact same as its Neo Revelation version. Though it is a bit stronger, it's just as much of a pain to actually power up. So yeah, this card, while pretty cool, also wasn't very good. Aside from it being pretty weak for an EX Pokemon, it was completely overshadowed by the Haul-On engine from the time. And with Blastoise EX, who was part of the best deck at the time, hitting Ho-Oh EX for weakness, it just wasn't meant to be. One of the more interesting Ho-Oh cards in my opinion is Ho-Oh from Secret Wonders, mainly due to its Phoenix Turn Pokepower, which lets you flip a coin whenever Ho-Oh would be knocked out by an attack. If heads, your opponent would still take a prize, but Ho-Oh would not be discarded. Instead, you would remove all damage and special conditions from Ho-Oh while also keeping its energy attached. Even compared to other Pokepowers or abilities we've seen today, this one is still very unique and would be the first Ho-Oh card to have some sort of revive mechanic, which would become a defining characteristic moving forward. Despite its cool Poké Power, this card was, again, not great. Once again, having a Rainbow Burn-esque attack that doesn't do enough damage for the hassle of getting the different energies, and once again being weak to many metagame threats of the time. But finally, with the release of HeartGold and SoulSilver, Ho-Oh would get an actually good card in the form of Ho-Oh Legend. Kind of. Okay, so the card itself is good and is used, just not when it was released. Anyways, we'll talk about that later. So what are legends? Printed throughout the HeartGold and SoulSilver era, legend Pokemon were comprised of two separate cards, a top and a bottom piece. And to get these Pokemon into play, you must have both pieces in your hand at the same time and play them down together. Somewhat similar to the V-Union mechanic we would see many years later. Originally, legend cards featured one single Pokemon, but with the release of other sets, would go on to include two different Pokemon on one card. Though these would instead give up two prizes instead of one. Not too dissimilar from the tag team Pokemon we would see later. Despite the somewhat convoluted conditions to get them into play, Ho-Oh is quite a strong card, especially for a single prize Pokemon. Its Sacred Rainbow Poké Power is its main selling point, making any energy attached to Ho-Oh count as fire energy. This ability includes special energies as well, which is great since double colorless energy was printed in the same set. So when this card is attached to Ho-Oh, it would now count as a double fire energy for one single attachment, which would make charging up its attack a lot easier. Its Bright Wing attack is simple but solid, doing 100 damage and requiring you to discard an energy from Ho-Oh. Again, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's at least more usable and easy to charge as compared to its Rainbow Burn attacks. Now, as I was alluding to earlier, this card didn't actually see any play when it was standard legal. There were just more powerful and more consistent Pokemon at the time that Ho-Oh just couldn't compete with, especially as a legend card, as aside from, I think, one or two, none of these guys really saw that much success. But, like many other cards from the HeartGold and SoulSilver era, Ho-Oh Legend would reach its full potential in the Legacy format. Gaining access to cards from the entire Black and White era was a godsend for this card. For starters, one of the issues with Legend Pokemon was how hard it was to actually find the pieces. As they weren't considered basic or evolution Pokemon, it was impossible to search them out with popular trainer cards such as Pokemon Collector or Elm's training method. But thanks to Ultra Ball searching out any Pokemon, piecing together Ho-Oh was extremely easy. Charging up Ho-Oh was also a much easier task, as not only did you have double colorless energy, you also had Electric from Noble Victories, whose Dynamotor ability lets you attach a lightning energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. And because of Ho-Oh's Pokebody, these lightning energies would then become fire energies. And since Bright Wing discards an energy when you attack naturally, these cards synergize nearly perfectly, especially with the assistance of Keldeo EX, whose Russian ability would switch it into the active, forcing Ho-Oh to the bench and allowing it to be charged with Dynamotor. Ho-Oh Legend also takes much better advantage of its fire typing in Legacy than it ever did in Standard, as it can hit one of the best decks in the format for weakness, that being Virizion Genesect, one-shotting both of these EX Pokemon for 2 prize cards. Overall, I would say Ho-Oh Legend was probably the first truly good Ho-Oh card. While it didn't make much of a wave in its standard format, in the Legacy format, it's a great option for one of the most powerful archetypes, and would seemingly be the turning point for Ho-Oh in the TCG, as from this point onward, Ho-Oh cards would continue to become more and more powerful. The next Ho-Oh card would be released in Black and White's Dragons Exalted, and is probably the most iconic Ho-Oh card in the modern era of the Pokemon TCG. That, of course, being Ho-Oh EX. First things first, Rainbow Burn, again. But this time around, this attack was actually usable, mainly due to Ho-Oh EX's phenomenal ability, Rebirth. Rebirth can only be activated while Ho-Oh is in the discard pile. You may then flip a coin, and if heads, place Ho-Oh onto your bench, along with 3 different types of basic energies from your discard pile. This ability is significant in many ways. For one, this is the first ability ever that is activated while a Pokemon is in the discard pile, paving the way for other similar abilities like Distortion Door or Netherworld Gate. Getting Ho-Oh into the discard pile was no problem either, with cards like Ultra Ball and Professor Juniper discarding Ho-Oh to use later while also getting you more resources. This ability was quite powerful for the time, as getting an extra 3 energies into play on the first turn of the game was almost unheard of. While this ability could be used to just power up Ho-Oh for Rainbow Burn, it was actually better suited as a way to charge up other attackers in combination with Energy Switch, powering up the likes of Terrakion or Mewtwo EX to do big damage while outpacing your opponent. While this card was standard legal, it did actually see a solid amount of play, but as the black and white era continued on, it was slowly phased out. But similarly to Ho-Oh Legend, this card would flourish in another format, this time around, Expanded. In the expanded format, Ho-Oh EX would reach its fullest potential. While its ability was already extremely strong, but by gaining access to the wide variety of tools in the expanded format, it would become downright broken. One of the best cards for Ho-Oh EX is Battle Compressor. Battle Compressor is already one of the best cards in the expanded format, but for this deck's purposes, it lets you search out Ho-Oh and your different energies from your deck and place them into your discard pile directly, allowing you to start using Rebirth as soon as possible. After a successful Rebirth, you could then use the supporter card Ninja Boy, who lets you search for a basic Pokemon and replace it with one of your other Pokemon in play. This card could transform your Ho-Oh into other powerful attackers from your deck, while also maintaining the energy that it brought about with Rebirth. While there is nearly an endless amount of different attackers you could choose from, some of the best ones to use were the amazing rare Pokemon. These single prize Pokemon all have extremely powerful attacks, but with the downside of having downright insane energy costs. But in this deck's case, these energy costs are actually perfect, since Ho-Oh has to accelerate 3 different types of energy with its ability. Some of the best ones to use are Amazing Rayquaza, whose Amazing Burst deals 80 damage for each energy you discard, Amazing Raikou, whose Amazing Shot deals 120 damage to both the active and one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, and Amazing Yveltal, whose Amazing Destruction instantly knocks out your opponent's active Pokemon. All of these cards are extraordinarily strong for single prize Pokemon, but because of their strange energy costs, they were quite difficult to get running consistently in a game. But thanks to Ho-Oh, these guys combined form an extremely powerful, fun, and surprisingly consistent deck. Well, you know, as long as you flip heads. Ho-Oh's next appearance would come in X and Y Breakpoint with an all-new version of Ho-Oh EX. This card is much more of an offensive threat when compared to its predecessor, with its attack, Elemental Feather, dealing 130 damage while also dealing 30 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. As is usual for Ho-Oh, the energy cost for the attack is a variety of different energies. Thankfully, there were a few ways to accelerate these different energies during this time in the standard format. The most iconic of these was the item card Max Elixir, which let you look at the top 6 cards of your deck and attach a basic energy card you find there to one of your benched basic Pokemon. With a couple of Max Elixirs and a decent amount of luck, Ho-Oh could be theoretically charged up as early as turn 1. Though the better and more consistent way to get it charged up was to pair it alongside Mega Manectric EX, whose attack, Turbo Bolt, would deal 110 damage and let you attach 2 basic energies from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. This attack was crucial to the deck strategy, as not only was it a great way to power up Ho-Oh, you were also able to keep up the pressure by dealing damage, even taking some knockouts on single prize Pokemon like Octillery and Garbodor, as well as getting a one-hit KO on the lightning weak Shaman EX, who was played in nearly every single deck during the X and Y era. Ho-Oh EX also had some extra survivability as well, thanks to its ability Purifying Fire, which let you heal 50 damage from Ho-Oh as long as it had a basic fire energy attached. One weakness of the deck is the fact that you do have to play so many different basic energies, as it can be difficult to find the correct combination of energies to attack with Ho-Oh. But once again, thanks to Battle Compressor, you can send the exact energies you need to the discard pile to then accelerate with Manectric. You also had access to Smeargle from Breakthrough, whose second coat ability let you switch one of your active Pokemon's basic energies with another basic energy from your discard pile, further helping you get the correct energies onto your Pokemon. Overall, this deck is actually pretty fun. While it didn't see much, if any, play when it was standard legal, it's still a pretty solid and a very fun deck to play, especially when played in a casual setting in the retro X and Y only format. The X and Y era would also contain a Ho-Oh and Ho-Oh Break promo card, which were both pretty terrible. At the very least, I do love the artwork on this card. The colors are phenomenal, and I love that it's flying through Ecruteak City, with the iconic Tin Tower being seen in the background. The Break, however, might just be one of the ugliest Break cards that were ever released, which, when we're talking about Break cards, is really saying something. Arriving in Sun and Moon's Burning Shadows, Ho-Oh GX is probably the best Ho-Oh card released up until that point in terms of the standard format. The goal of the deck is to get set up on turn 1 and swing for huge amounts of damage turn after turn, primarily with Ho-Oh's attack, Phoenix Burn, which deals a massive 180 damage, with the downside of not being able to attack the next turn. 180 damage was a huge number to swing for at the time, and in combination with Choice Band, a tool that makes attacks deal 30 more damage to GX Pokemon, you could one-shot nearly every basic Pokemon GX, as well as hitting weakness on some other larger Pokemon, most notably Decidueye GX. This powerful attack could be charged on the very first turn of the game going first, thanks to the supporter card Kiawe. Kiawe lets you search your deck for 4 fire energies and attach them to one of your Pokemon, with the cost of ending your turn. At this time in the game, you were allowed to play a supporter card going first, but you still couldn't attack. So the fact that Kiawe ends your turn didn't really matter as long as you were going first. And thanks to Tapu Lele GX, whose Wonder Tag ability lets you search your deck for a supporter when played to the bench, you could pull off a turn 1 Kiawe nearly every single game. Since Ho-Oh would be ready to attack by turn 1, your other energy attachments to go to your other attackers, mainly Salazzle GX, whose Diabolical Claws attack would deal 50 damage for each prize card that you've taken. This attack makes Salazzle a brutal late-game finisher, assuming you've taken a decent amount of prize cards, which with how fast and hard Ho-Oh can attack, should not be an issue whatsoever. Another notable card here is Turtonator GX. While you could attack with it in a pinch, it's really just here for its GX attack, Nitro Tank GX, which lets you attach 5 fire energy cards from your discard pile to your Pokemon however you'd like, giving you even more options to get your attackers charged up. While this deck wasn't exactly a tier 1 or even a tier 2 archetype, for what it was still pretty solid, especially when you compare it to the Ho-Oh cards that came before it. All in all, Ho-Oh GX is probably the best performing Ho-Oh card in the entire history of Pokemon's standard format. The remaining cards from the Sun and Moon era are somewhat interesting, as they both call back to previous cards. Shining Ho-Oh's Golden Wing ability is a direct reprint of Ho-Oh EX's Pokepower from Unseen Forces. Playability-wise, this card is nothing special, but since it's a shiny, one of the most popular shiny Pokemon at that, it's at least somewhat desirable. Meanwhile, Ho-Oh from Lost Thunder is a near 1-for-1 reprint of Ho-Oh from Neo Revelation, sparing some minor differences to its HP and damage. While it still wasn't very good a second time around, it's still cool to see such a direct reprint of a card so many years later. The Sword and Shield era contains the final Ho-Oh cards to be released as of the time of this video. First up is Ho-Oh from Celebrations. While this card does have some beautiful artwork pairing perfectly with the Lugia from the same set, in terms of the standard format, this card has not and still doesn't see any amount of play. But if you really want to play this card, there's no better home for it than Gym Leader Challenge. Due to the overall lower HP of the GLC format, Ho-Oh's Sacred Fire is much more of a threat, dealing 50 damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon. Fire Blast is also a decently strong attack, dealing 120 damage with the cost of discarding 1 energy. Thanks to the larger card pool available, Ho-Oh gets access to many of the great Fire-type exclusive items, supporters, and support Pokemon to boost its consistency and lethality. With cards like Welder and Blacksmith accelerating energy from the hand and discard pile respectively, Charizard from Pokemon Go, whose Burn Brightly ability doubles all fire energy in play, and damage-boosting tools like Muscle Band or Fighting Fury Belt, Ho-Oh can be a huge threat, either hammering away at the opponent's active Pokemon with Fire Blast, or picking off low HP targets on the bench with Sacred Fire, all for just 1 or 2 energy attachments. While it may pale in comparison to some other attackers in the format, it really does shine as a great Pokemon in any Fire-type Gym Leader Challenge deck. The final released card we have today is Ho-Oh V from Silver Tempest. Right off the bat, I have to say, this might well be one of the best looking Vs that were ever printed. Honestly, most Vs are pretty ugly, thanks in most part to the mediocre CGI that's done for most of these cards. But when they actually have an artist hand draw these things, they can be some of the best looking cards in the entire franchise. But don't be confused, Ho-Oh V is far more than just a pretty face. It's also a familiar one, as this card is somewhat of a spiritual successor of Ho-Oh EX from Dragons Exalted. Its Reviving Flame ability can be activated if Ho-Oh is in the discard pile, which you can then place it onto your bench along with 4 energies from the discard pile. As you probably noticed, this ability is nearly the exact same as Rebirth, though there is a trade-off. While there is no longer a coin flip, using this ability now ends your turn. This change does make it a more consistent ability, though it also makes it a slower one to use throughout a game. Another upside to this ability is it doesn't force you to attach different types of energies, as all 4 of the energies can be whatever you want. This change does actually make Ho-Oh V more splashable into a variety of decks, especially those that deal more damage based on the total amount of energy in play, such as Shadow Rider Calyrex or Darkrai V-Star. But similarly to Ho-Oh EX, I think this card is most interesting when used in the expanded format. This card is used in a similar role as Ho-Oh EX, using its ability in combination with Ninja Boy, as well as Thornton, who has a similar effect, letting you switch one of your Pokemon with a Pokemon from the discard pile to cheat powerful attackers into play or accelerate energy to boost other powerful Pokemon's attacks. However, one difference this card does have from Ho-Oh EX is that Ho-Oh V is actually a very powerful attacker in its own right, using its ability to power up its signature move, Rainbow Burn. This time around, dealing 100 damage plus an additional 30 for each type of basic energy attached to Ho-Oh. Combining Ho-Oh's ability with multiple max elixirs, you can charge energy onto Ho-Oh extremely fast, and thanks to the now discontinued fairy energy, you can cap out Ho-Oh's Rainbow Burn at a massive 370 damage, one-shotting every single Pokemon in the game with damage to spare. This deck is also decently consistent, well, at least for a deck playing 9 different types of energies, using Jirachi from Team Up's Stellar Wish ability to take a trainer card from the top 5 cards of your deck, and Diancie from Astral Radiance, whose Princess's Curtain ability prevents the effect of your opponent's supporter cards used on your benched basic Pokemon while Diancie is active. These 2 cards ensure you can find vital trainer cards like Energy Recycler and Max Elixir, while also ensuring that Ho-Oh V won't be gusted into the active or have its energy removed by your opponent's supporter cards. Now, while this deck does sound very good, it is still expanded, and unfortunately, since this deck doesn't guarantee a win by turn 1 or 2, it's not quite on par with other expanded threats. Plus, it does still have its consistency issues. I mean, the deck does play 9 different types of energy, so it really shouldn't come as any surprise. That all aside, this deck is still a ton of fun to play. Its strategy is very unique, as it almost feels like a puzzle, trying to piece together all the correct energies to get your attack. It also has a very strange blend of skill and luck, rewarding proper and strategic sequencing, while also hoping you get lucky hitting the correct energies off of your max elixirs, or in some cases, even just hitting max elixirs at all. While the expanded format is in a very, we'll say, strange place at the moment, if you play this deck against one of a similar power level with some friends casually, it's by far one of the most fun and one of my favorite Ho-Oh decks to play. Alright, so technically that wasn't the last Ho-Oh card, as the newest one that we know about is Ho-Oh EX from the Pokemon Trading Card Game Classic. This card has yet to be released in America at the time that I'm making this video, but it really doesn't matter since, for some reason, every single card in this collection is illegal for tournament play, even the brand new cards that have never been printed before. So yeah, even if this card was good, which it really isn't, you couldn't even use it in any official format, making this product even less worthy of its gnarly $400 price tag. Okay, I gotta come clean about something here. I decided to do this video before actually doing any research on Ho-Oh's history. I mean, I knew about Ho-Oh EX and Ho-Oh V, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm sure there's tons of cool cards. I mean, it's such an iconic and powerful legendary, there's no way it's been bad. But in the early stages of research, I was quite disappointed. With nearly every Ho-Oh card released in the TCG from Gen 2, 3, and 4 being either mediocre or just flat out terrible. But I gotta say, starting with HeartGold and SoulSilver, Ho-Oh cards dramatically improved. Now that's not to say there weren't any bad cards after that point, because there definitely were, but the cards we would see from HeartGold and SoulSilver onward were more than just simple big attackers, with Ho-Oh EX specifically being one of the most unique cards ever created. Being the first card in the history of the game to be activated from your discard pile, Ho-Oh also has a very strong identity with its iconic Rainbow Burn, and its various reviving-based abilities or Poke Powers make it both a unique and iconic Pokemon no matter the generation. While it had a very rough start in the TCG, just like the Phoenix it's based on, it rose from the ashes to shine brighter and better than ever before.